I came home and caught my mother-in-law giving my son alcohol in his sippy cup, saying, "This will make you strong." The smell hit me before I even saw what was happening. Sharp, chemical, wrong. I'd come home early from the warehouse because of a power outage, walking through my front door at 2:15 on a Wednesday to find my mother-in-law Diane in the kitchen with my 3-year-old son Finn. She had him on her lap, his blue sippy cup pressed against his mouth, and she was whispering something to him in that encouraging voice people use when they're trying to get a kid to eat vegetables. Finn was crying, not tantrum crying, scared crying. His little hands were pushing against her arms, but she held him firm, tilting the cup higher. I stood there frozen because my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Then Finn coughed, and liquid sprayed from his mouth onto Diane's shirt, and the smell got stronger. Whiskey. That was whiskey. My mother-in-law was feeding my 3-year-old son whiskey from his sippy cup at 2:15 on a Wednesday afternoon in my kitchen. She looked up, saw me standing there, and she smiled. Didn't stop what she was doing, didn't pull the cup away or look guilty, just kept holding it against Finn's mouth while making direct eye contact with me and said, "This will make you strong like Grandpa was." Her voice was calm, proud even, like she was giving him medicine and I'd walked in during a perfectly normal moment of caregiving. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My body had disconnected from my brain and all I could do was stand there watching my mother-in-law poison my son while smiling at me. Then Finn made this sound. This awful choking whimper that snapped me back. I lunged forward and ripped him from her arms. He grabbed onto my shirt and buried his face in my neck, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath, strong enough that my eyes watered. How much had she given him? How long had this been going on? Diane stood up slowly and brushed off her pants like nothing was wrong. She picked up the sippy cup from the table and held it up to show me. "Only 2 ounces today," she said. "We're building up his tolerance properly." We're building tolerance. Those words didn't make sense together. I asked her what the hell she was talking about, and she sighed like I was a slow student who needed extra explanation. She said she'd been giving Finn small amounts of whiskey every Wednesday for the past 6 weeks. Started with just a few drops mixed in apple juice to get him used to the taste. Now she was up to 2 ounces of straight whiskey because his system was adapting. She'd been following a very specific protocol, very scientific, very traditional. My family used to do this with boys to make them strong and resilient. Her father had done it with her brothers and they'd all turned out successful. Finn was weak, always getting sick, always crying. The whiskey was fixing that, teaching his body to be tough. I stared at her and my hands were shaking so hard I thought I might drop Finn. 6 weeks. Every single Wednesday when I left for work and trusted her to watch him. Every Wednesday I'd come home and she'd tell me what a good boy Finn had been, how he'd eaten his lunch and taken his nap and played nicely. She'd been poisoning him and documenting it like a science experiment. I looked at Finn in my arms, really looked at him. His skin had this grayish tint I'd been telling myself was just winter paleness. His eyes were unfocused and glassy. He'd lost weight. I could feel his ribs through his shirt when I held him. He'd been throwing up constantly for weeks. We'd taken him to the pediatrician twice thinking it was a stomach virus. The doctor had said it was probably something going around. Just keep him hydrated and he'd get better. It wasn't a virus, it was alcohol poisoning. My mother-in-law had been systematically poisoning my son, and we'd been taking him to doctors who'd told us it was normal childhood illness. Diane was still talking, explaining her methods like she was giving me a recipe. She said modern parents were too soft, too afraid of letting children experience discomfort. That's why this generation was weak. Her generation understood that you had to harden children early, build their tolerance to pain and sickness and discomfort. The whiskey was just the first step. There were other traditional methods she'd planned to introduce once his alcohol tolerance was established. She said it so casually, like there was a whole curriculum of abuse she'd mapped out for my son. I told her I was calling 911 and she laughed, actually laughed. Then she pulled out her phone and held it up to show me her screen. It was a Facebook group called Traditional Child Rearing Methods, with 3,247 members. She scrolled through posts from other grandmothers and parents talking about giving toddlers alcohol to build immunity, sharing dosage recommendations, celebrating when children stopped fighting the treatments. There were hundreds of posts, thousands of comments, a whole community of people doing exactly what Diane had been doing to Finn. She'd been getting advice from them, following their protocols. She showed me her own posts from the past 6 weeks. Week 1 started with 5 ml mixed in apple juice. Subject showed resistance but consumed full dose. Subject. She'd called Finn the subject like he was a lab rat. I scrolled through her posts and felt sicker with each one. Week 3 increased to 15 ml. Subject experienced vomiting, but this is normal adjustment. Week 5 up to 40 ml. Subject more compliant now, showing less resistance. Other group members had commented on each post with encouragement. Keep going. The vomiting means it's working. He'll thank you when he's older. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. Diane didn't try to stop me. She just stood there with her arms crossed, looking mildly annoyed like I was making an unnecessary fuss. The operator answered, and I tried to explain, but the words came out wrong. My mother-in-law has been giving my son alcohol. He's 3 years old. She's been doing it for 6 weeks. I could hear how insane it sounded even as I was saying it. The operator asked if Finn needed medical attention, and I looked at his face. His eyes were rolling back in his head. His breathing was shallow. Yes, we needed an ambulance right now. The operator said it was on the way and asked me to stay on the line. Diane was watching me with this expression of disappointed concern, like she was worried about my mental state. She said to the phone, loud enough for the operator to hear, "He's been very stressed lately. I'm concerned about his fitness as a parent." She was already building her defense, already planting seeds of doubt about my credibility. The operator asked if everyone was safe, and I said yes, but I watched Diane while I said it. She was too calm, too confident. She believed she'd done nothing wrong. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. I stood by the front door holding Finn and watching Diane, who'd sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a notebook. She was writing in it, actually taking notes while we waited for paramedics. When they knocked, I opened the door, and 2 paramedics rushed in with their equipment. Diane stood up immediately and walked toward them with her hand extended like she was greeting dinner guests. She introduced herself as Diane Ashford and explained that she'd been administering traditional strengthening treatments to her grandson to address his chronic weakness and illness. One paramedic knelt down to examine Finn, while the other one stared at Diane. He asked what kind of strengthening treatment she'd been giving. Diane smiled and gestured to the sippy cup still sitting on the table. "Quality whiskey," she said. "Only the best for my grandson. We've been following a very specific protocol for tolerance building." The paramedic's face changed. He looked at his partner and said something quiet into his radio. Then he told me they needed to transport Finn immediately. Diane objected. She said as the supervising adult she didn't consent to unnecessary medical intervention. Finn was fine, just adapting to the treatment. The paramedic told her she wasn't the legal guardian, and her consent meant nothing. They were taking Finn to the hospital whether she agreed or not. Diane's smile finally cracked. She said they were overreacting to traditional methods they didn't understand. That modern medicine had made people afraid of anything that caused temporary discomfort. That children used to be raised this way, and they survived just fine. The paramedic ignored her and started checking Finn's vital signs. His oxygen levels were low. His heart rate was elevated. They got him onto a small stretcher, and I followed them out to the ambulance. Behind me, I heard Diane on her phone. She was calling someone, her lawyer probably, or my wife, Autumn. I didn't know which was worse. Police arrived just as they were loading Finn into the ambulance. 2 officers, a man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes, and a younger woman with sharp features. The man introduced himself as Officer Keith Lawson and asked what happened. I started explaining, and Diane appeared beside me, interrupting. She told the officers that I'd been the one giving Finn alcohol and she'd tried to stop me, that I'd become violent when she'd confronted me, that she feared for her safety and her grandson's safety. I stared at her. She was lying, looking the officers right in the eyes and lying without hesitation. Officer Lawson asked if anyone was injured, and Diane touched her arm like it hurt, said I'd grabbed her roughly when I'd taken Finn. Officer Tanaka, the younger officer, looked at me and asked if that was true. I said yes. I'd grabbed Finn from her because she was forcing him to drink whiskey. Officer Tanaka's expression shifted. She asked Diane to clarify what I'd just said. Diane's face rearranged itself into an expression of concern. She said I'd become paranoid lately, making wild accusations. She'd been giving Finn herbal tonics to boost his immune system, and I'd convinced myself it was alcohol. She was worried about my mental state. Officer Lawson asked if there was any evidence of what had actually been given to Finn. I pointed at the kitchen. The sippy cup was still on the table. Officer Tanaka went inside and came back 30 seconds later holding the cup carefully. She unscrewed the lid and sniffed. Her face confirmed everything. That was whiskey. Diane's story changed immediately. She said yes, it was whiskey, but it was part of a legitimate traditional strengthening protocol that had been used for generations. She pulled out her phone and showed them the Facebook group. Officer Lawson took her phone and started scrolling. His jaw got tighter with each post he read. He asked Diane how long she'd been giving alcohol to a 3-year-old. She said 6 weeks, following the recommended dosing schedule exactly, building tolerance gradually like the experts in the group advised. Officer Lawson asked who these experts were. Diane said other parents and grandparents who'd successfully raised strong children using traditional methods. Officer Lawson looked at Officer Tanaka, and something passed between them. He asked Diane if she understood that giving alcohol to a toddler was illegal. Diane said it shouldn't be. Laws had become too restrictive, too influenced by modern softness. Real strength was built through controlled exposure to discomfort. He asked her to step outside so they could talk to me privately. Diane said she wasn't going anywhere without her lawyer. Officer Lawson said that was her right, but she was going outside either way. Voluntary or not. Her choice. Diane walked outside, but not before looking at me and saying I'd regret this. That Finn would grow up weak and sick because I'd stopped his treatments. That I was failing him as a father. Officer Tanaka closed the door behind her and turned to me. She asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I told her about coming home early, finding Diane with the sippy cup, the smell of whiskey, Finn's reaction, the Facebook group, the 6 weeks of documented poisoning. She wrote everything down. Officer Lawson came back in and said Diane was making calls, probably to my wife. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Autumn. I called back and she answered immediately, her voice high and panicked. What's happening? Why are police at the house? Why is Finn going to the hospital? Her mom said you attacked them, that you've been acting crazy. I tried to explain, but she kept interrupting. Her mother had told her I'd been giving Finn alcohol, and when Diane tried to stop me, I'd gotten violent. That police were there because Diane had called them on me. That I was trying to flip the story and blame her mother. My wife believed her mother over me. At least initially. At least until Officer Tanaka took the phone and identified herself and told Autumn she needed to come to Memorial Hospital immediately. That her son had alcohol poisoning, and her mother had admitted to giving it to him. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then Autumn said something I couldn't hear, and the line went dead. Officer Lawson asked me about Diane's relationship with Finn. Had she ever done anything else concerning? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Finn had been different after her babysitting days. More clingy with me. Less excited to see his grandmother. He'd started refusing certain cups and bottles. We'd thought it was a phase. Now I was realizing he'd been trying to tell us something was wrong, and we'd missed every single sign. Officer Tanaka bagged the sippy cup as evidence. Officer Lawson took photos of the kitchen, of Diane's notebook she'd left on the table. I hadn't noticed it before, but now I saw it was full of handwritten notes, dates, times, dosages, observations about Finn's reactions. She'd been documenting everything like a clinical trial, like Finn was a research subject instead of her grandson. Officer Lawson asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes, immediately, without hesitation. He said they'd be arresting Diane for child endangerment at minimum, possibly assault, possibly other charges depending on what the hospital found. We got to Memorial Hospital, and they rushed Finn into an examination room. I wasn't allowed to follow. A nurse told me to wait, and someone would update me soon. I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room and stared at my hands and realized they were still shaking. Had been shaking for almost an hour now. A man in scrubs approached. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Fleming and asked me to follow him to a private consultation room. That scared me more than anything so far. Private consultation rooms meant bad news. He closed the door and sat down across from me, and his face was serious. He said Finn's blood alcohol content was 0.08%, legally drunk for an adult, dangerously high for a 3-year-old. They were running more tests, but preliminary results showed his liver enzymes were elevated. Significant elevation, consistent with chronic alcohol exposure over an extended period. He asked how long Finn had been consuming alcohol. I told him 6 weeks that I knew of, possibly longer. Dr. Fleming's jaw tightened. He said they'd need to keep Finn for observation, monitor his liver function, check for neurological damage. Alcohol exposure at this age during critical brain development could have lasting effects. They wouldn't know the full extent for weeks or possibly months. I asked if Finn would be okay. Dr. Fleming said honestly he didn't know yet. The liver damage might be reversible if we'd caught it early enough, but the neurological effects were harder to predict. Children's brains were resilient but also vulnerable. We'd have to wait and see. Those words felt like a punch. Wait and see if my son's brain was permanently damaged because my mother-in-law had been poisoning him and I hadn't noticed. A social worker appeared. Young guy with kind eyes and a clipboard. Isaac Morales. He needed to ask me some questions. Standard protocol when a child came in with signs of abuse. I answered everything. Yes, Diane had been babysitting every Wednesday. No, I hadn't given permission for any treatments. Yes, Finn had been sick a lot lately, but we'd thought it was normal childhood illness. No, I'd never suspected anything like this. Isaac took notes and said Child Protective Services would be investigating. Both me and my wife would need to cooperate fully. They'd be doing home visits, interviews, background checks, making sure Finn was safe if he came home. If he came home, not when, if. I asked what that meant, and Isaac said they needed to make sure the home environment was safe before releasing Finn from hospital custody. That could take days or weeks depending on what they found. Autumn arrived, and she looked destroyed. Her eyes were swollen, her hands were shaking. She saw me and ran over and grabbed my arms. Where's Finn? Is he okay? What happened? I told her everything, walking in. The sippy cup, the whiskey, the Facebook group, 6 weeks of documented poisoning. Her face went through so many expressions I couldn't track them all. Disbelief, horror, confusion, denial. She kept saying no, that's not possible. Her mom wouldn't do that. There had to be a mistake. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos Officer Lawson had sent me of Diane's Facebook posts. Autumn read them and her face went white. She sat down hard in one of the plastic chairs. Her mom had written those? Her mom had called Finn the subject? Her mom had documented his vomiting and pain and called it normal adjustment? I said yes, all of it. Autumn put her head in her hands and started crying. Not quiet crying. Loud broken sobs that made other people in the waiting room stare. I sat next to her and didn't know what to say. Her mother had poisoned our son, and there were no words that would make that better. Dr. Fleming came back and said we could see Finn, but only briefly. He was sedated and needed rest. We followed him down a hallway to a pediatric room. Finn looked so small in that hospital bed. He had an IV in his arm and monitors stuck to his chest, and his face was pale, too pale. Autumn went to him immediately and took his little hand and whispered his name. He didn't wake up. She looked at the doctor and asked when he'd wake up. Dr. Fleming said they'd sedated him to let his body rest and process the alcohol. He'd probably wake up in a few hours. They'd need to monitor him closely for withdrawal symptoms. Withdrawal. My 3-year-old son might go through alcohol withdrawal. Autumn asked if there would be permanent damage. Dr. Fleming said they were running tests, but it was too early to know. Children's livers were resilient. His might recover fully, or there might be lasting damage. Same with his brain development. They'd know more in a few days. Those maybes sat heavy. Everything was maybe now. Maybe he'd be okay. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe his grandmother's abuse would echo through his entire life. We sat with Finn for 20 minutes before a nurse said we needed to let him rest. We walked back to the waiting room, and Autumn's phone rang. Her mother. She stared at the screen, and I watched her decide whether to answer. She did. Diane's voice came through loud enough that I could hear it from where I sat. Autumn, honey, you need to listen to me. Your husband has lost his mind. He attacked me, and now he's trying to blame me for his own actions. I've been trying to help Finn get stronger, and your husband won't listen to traditional methods. You know how your father and I raised you kids. We used the old ways, and you all turned out healthy and successful. Autumn's face was unreadable. She said, Mom, I saw your Facebook posts. Silence on the other end. Then Diane's voice changed, became defensive. Those posts were taken out of context. The group was for parents who understood that modern medicine had made children weak, that controlled exposure to discomfort, built resilience. Autumn said, You gave my son whiskey for 6 weeks. Diane said yes, carefully measured doses to build tolerance. Exactly what her father's family had done for generations. Autumn asked if Diane understood Finn was in the hospital with alcohol poisoning and liver damage. Diane said that was the medical establishment overreacting to traditional methods, that Finn would be fine, that temporary discomfort was necessary for long-term strength. Autumn hung up, just pressed end, and sat there staring at her phone. She looked at me and asked how she'd never seen this side of her mother. I said because Diane had hidden it, because abusers were good at hiding, because Autumn had been raised to trust her mother without question. Autumn said her childhood suddenly made more sense. Her mom had always been controlling, always had strange ideas about toughening kids up. Autumn remembered being forced to sit in ice baths to build tolerance to cold, being given bitter herbs that made her throw up because it would strengthen her stomach. Her brothers had gotten worse, forced to do push-ups until they collapsed. Denied food as punishment. Their father had participated too, enabled it, called it traditional discipline. Autumn had thought it was normal because it was all she'd known. Now she was realizing it had been abuse. Her whole childhood had been abuse disguised as tradition, and she'd been letting her mother around Finn unsupervised, giving her access to continue the cycle. Officer Lawson appeared and said Diane had been arrested. She was being charged with child endangerment, assault, and administering harmful substances to a minor. Her bail was set at $75,000. She'd probably post it quickly. Autumn asked if her mom would be able to contact us. Officer Lawson said there was a restraining order preventing contact with Finn, but not with us. We could block her if we wanted. Autumn's phone rang again. Her brother this time. She answered, and I heard him yelling immediately. What the hell did you do to Mom? She got arrested because of you two. Dad is at the police station posting bail, and he's furious. Mom was just trying to help Finn, and you're destroying the family over it. Autumn tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He said their mom would never hurt anyone, that I was clearly the problem, and Autumn was being manipulated, that the whole family was on their mom's side, and Autumn needed to choose. Autumn said she was choosing her son. Her brother called her a traitor and hung up. Then her sister called. Same conversation, same accusations, same ultimatum. Choose Mom or lose the family. Autumn chose Finn both times. By the end of the day, she'd gotten similar calls from aunts, uncles, cousins. Diane had called everyone with her version of events. She was the victim. I was the abuser. Autumn was the daughter who'd betrayed her mother to protect an abusive husband. The narrative was already set in their minds. Evidence didn't matter. Diane was family, and family protected each other. Autumn sat in that waiting room and watched her entire family turn on her through a series of phone calls and text messages. She blocked numbers until her phone stopped buzzing. Detective Angela Reeves showed up that evening. Sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s, who looked like she'd seen every terrible thing humans could do to each other. She needed statements from both of us, separately. I went first, told her everything again. She recorded it, asked detailed questions about Diane's behavior over the past 6 weeks. Had I noticed anything off? Looking back, yes. Finn had been different. Diane had been different. More secretive, more defensive when asked about their day. But I'd attributed it to normal grandparent stuff. Detective Reeves asked about the Facebook group. I showed her the screenshots Officer Lawson had sent me. She looked at them, and her expression got hard. She said the group was under investigation. 3,000 members potentially abusing children. They'd already identified at least 15 other cases similar to Finn's. Children hospitalized with alcohol poisoning. Parents claiming they were following traditional strengthening methods. The group had been active for 4 years, coaching parents and grandparents through systematic child abuse while calling it tradition. Detective Reeves said it was one of the worst cases she'd seen in 20 years of detective work. She asked if I wanted to see justice. I said yes. She said then I needed to be prepared for a long fight. Diane clearly believed she'd done nothing wrong. People like that didn't plead guilty or show remorse. Autumn's interview took longer, over an hour. When she came out, her eyes were dead. Detective Reeves had asked her why she'd approved her mother's treatments without knowing what they were, whether she'd seen warning signs and ignored them, whether she'd known about her mother's beliefs regarding traditional child-rearing. Autumn said she felt like she was on trial instead of her mother, like she was being blamed for trusting the woman who'd raised her. Detective Reeves had apparently been sympathetic but firm, said that mothers had a responsibility to protect their children even from family. That trust wasn't an excuse for negligence. Autumn asked me if I blamed her. I didn't know how to answer that. Part of me did. Part of me understood. We sat in that waiting room all night, taking turns going to check on Finn. He woke up around 2 a.m. confused and scared, crying for us. We both went in and held him and told him he was safe. He asked why he was in the hospital, asked if Grandma was coming, asked if he'd been bad. Those questions broke us both. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that his grandmother poisoned him? That the person who was supposed to love him had hurt him deliberately? We said he hadn't been bad, that Grandma made a mistake and wasn't allowed to visit, that we loved him and would keep him safe. He seemed to accept that in the way kids do. Too young to understand, but old enough to feel the tension. Finn stayed in the hospital for 6 days. His liver enzymes slowly came down. Not to normal levels, but better. Dr. Fleming said he'd need ongoing monitoring, blood tests every 2 weeks to track his liver function. He'd need to avoid certain medications that stressed the liver, might need special treatment if his enzymes didn't normalize within 6 months. The neurological testing was worse. They did cognitive assessments and developmental screenings and found delays. Nothing dramatic, but measurable. His memory recall was poor. His attention span was shortened. His emotional regulation was affected. Dr. Fleming said some of this might improve with time, or it might be permanent. Alcohol exposure during early childhood could cause lasting changes to brain structure. We wouldn't know the full extent until Finn was older. Maybe when he started school, they'd see learning difficulties. Maybe they wouldn't. More maybes. Isaac, the social worker, came back multiple times. He interviewed us separately and together. Did home visits to check our house was safe. Interviewed neighbors and Autumn's co-workers and my supervisors. Built a complete picture of our lives and our fitness as parents. He said preliminary findings suggested we were appropriate guardians, that the abuse had come from external family, not us, but the investigation would remain open pending Diane's trial. If she was convicted, Finn could come home. If she wasn't, CPS would need to reassess our fitness given that we'd failed to protect him. That possibility terrified us. That Diane might be found not guilty, and we'd lose Finn because we'd trusted her. Isaac said not to worry about it yet. Focus on Finn's recovery, easy for him to say. Autumn's family kept calling even though she'd blocked their personal numbers. They used friends' phones, created new numbers, left voicemails that ranged from pleading to threatening. Her father left a message saying Diane was destroyed by what we'd done, that we'd turned the whole family against her over traditional discipline methods, that Autumn had broken her mother's heart. Autumn cried listening to it, said her father had been part of her abusive childhood too, had stood by while her mother did terrible things, had called it character building. Now he was defending Diane because admitting she was wrong would mean admitting he'd been wrong too. Their whole marriage was built on shared delusion about their parenting methods. Charges were officially filed 2 weeks after Finn's hospitalization. Child endangerment, assault, reckless endangerment, 3 felony counts. Diane pleaded not guilty, claimed she'd been following legitimate traditional methods that had been practiced for generations. Her attorney was Preston Whitmore, expensive, aggressive, known for defending difficult cases. He filed motions to suppress evidence, claimed the sippy cup had been seized without proper warrant, that Diane's statements had been made under duress, that the Facebook group posts were protected speech. The prosecutor, Nicole Strand, fought back hard. She had Finn's medical records, the Facebook group documentation, my eyewitness testimony, Officer Lawson's reports. It seemed like an open and shut case. But Whitmore was good. He started building a narrative that Diane was a devoted grandmother using methods from her cultural heritage, that modern medicine had criminalized traditional practices, that this was persecution of alternative parenting styles. He filed motions to have Finn's medical records excluded, claimed they were prejudicial, that any jury seeing a sick child would be biased against Diane, regardless of evidence. Judge ruled against him, but the attempt showed his strategy. He was going to make this about tradition versus modernity, about family rights versus government overreach, about a grandmother's love being misunderstood. The trial was set for 4 months out, 4 months of waiting, 4 months of Finn asking when Grandma would visit, 4 months of Autumn's family sending messages about forgiveness and family loyalty. 4 months of me waking up at 3 a.m., seeing Diane smile as she pressed that sippy cup to Finn's mouth. Whitmore also filed a motion requiring me to undergo psychological evaluation, claimed I had a history of paranoia and overreaction, that my testimony was unreliable. Judge granted it. I had to see court-appointed psychologist Dr. Victor Kane for assessment. He asked about my childhood, my relationship with Autumn, my work stress, my feelings about Diane, whether I'd ever had thoughts of harming myself or others. I answered everything honestly, told him I was angry but stable, that finding my son being poisoned had been traumatic, but I was functioning. Dr. Kane's evaluation took 3 sessions. Final report said I showed signs of acute stress related to witnessed trauma, but no underlying mental health issues that would affect my credibility. Whitmore tried to discredit it, but judge ruled it admissible. Autumn had to be evaluated too. Same questions, same probing into her mental state and relationship with her mother. Dr. Kane asked if she'd known about her mother's beliefs regarding traditional child rearing. Autumn said she'd known her mother had old-fashioned ideas, but not that they extended to poisoning children. Dr. Kane asked if Autumn felt guilty for trusting her mother. Yes, overwhelmingly, every day. Dr. Kane's report on Autumn was similar to mine. Acute trauma response, but no underlying issues. Meanwhile, Diane's attorney was building his defense. He'd found experts, a cultural anthropologist who would testify that alcohol exposure in children was practiced in multiple cultures historically, a naturopathic doctor who'd claim small amounts of alcohol could stimulate immune response, a parenting coach who specialized in traditional discipline methods, all of them willing to say Diane's actions were within the realm of acceptable alternative parenting. Nicole Strand was furious. She told us these experts were fringe at best, frauds at worst, but they'd sound credible to a jury unfamiliar with actual medical science. She was bringing her own experts. Dr. Fleming would testify about Finn's injuries. A pediatric toxicologist would explain alcohol's effects on developing brains. A child psychologist would discuss trauma. But she warned us that trials were unpredictable, that juries sometimes made emotional decisions rather than logical ones, that if even one juror bought into Diane's traditional parenting narrative, we might get a hung jury or worse. Finn started showing behavioral changes around week 3 after discharge. Nightmares every night, screaming awake, crying about scary drinks, refusing all liquids except water from clear cups he could see through, having meltdowns when Autumn tried to give him medicine for a cold. The pediatric psychologist, Dr. Simone Laurent, said this was expected. Finn had trauma around ingestion, around being forced to consume something harmful. It would take months of therapy to address, maybe years. Finn also became terrified of older women, would hide behind me when we saw grandmothers at the park, would cry if a woman with white hair tried to talk to him. Dr. Laurent said he'd associated his trauma with Diane's appearance and generalized it. More therapy needed. More time, more damage that would echo through Finn's childhood. Autumn stopped sleeping. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling. I'd ask what she was thinking, and she'd say she was going through every memory of her childhood, every moment with her mother, looking for signs she'd missed, realizing her entire understanding of her family had been wrong. She'd thought they were strict, but loving. Now she saw they'd been abusive, systematically, proudly, and she'd almost let the cycle continue with Finn. That guilt was destroying her. I suggested therapy. She went twice and quit, said the therapist didn't understand family trauma, didn't understand what it felt like to realize your whole childhood was abuse you'd normalized. 3 months before trial, Diane sent a letter, long, handwritten, addressed to both of us. Autumn opened it and read the first page before her hands started shaking. She handed it to me. Diane had written 12 pages explaining her methods in detail. The alcohol protocol was based on practices her father had learned from his father. Small amounts given regularly to build tolerance. The theory was that children raised with exposure to low levels of toxins would develop stronger immune systems and better stress response. She'd done research, found the Facebook group, connected with other families using similar methods. She'd been careful, scientific. Everything had been documented and measured. The vomiting and lethargy were expected phases, Finn's body adjusting. She'd planned to continue treatments until he was 5, then taper off. By then, his system would be permanently strengthened. The letter didn't acknowledge wrongdoing. It was written like a medical report, clinical, detached. The final paragraph said she hoped we'd reconsider pressing charges once we understood the science, that Finn could still benefit from continued treatments under supervised conditions, that she was willing to work with us to complete the protocol properly. Autumn threw up after reading it, actually got sick reading her mother's clinical description of poisoning her grandson. I called Nicole Strand. She said send the letter immediately. Diane had essentially written a confession, admitted everything, showed clear premeditation and lack of remorse. This was prosecutorial gold. But it also showed how delusional Diane was, how convinced she was that she'd done nothing wrong. That made her dangerous. Nicole said Diane might actually believe she'd win at trial, that a jury would see her methods as legitimate. People that delusional were unpredictable. She recommended we take extra safety precautions, change our locks, install cameras, vary our routines. Diane had posted bail and was free pending trial. The restraining order only covered Finn. She could technically approach us if she claimed it was accidental. Autumn's father called using a blocked number, got through before we realized and hung up. He said Diane was suffering. The prosecution was persecution. Our family had always used these methods and we'd all turned out fine. Hadn't we? He asked Autumn directly. Hadn't she turned out fine? Autumn said no. She'd spent her childhood being abused and normalizing it. She'd developed anxiety and depression that she'd hidden. She'd learned to mistrust her own feelings and accept pain as normal. She hadn't turned out fine. She'd turned out damaged. Her father was silent. Then he said she was being dramatic. That discipline wasn't abuse. That her mother loved her. Autumn hung up. Whitmore filed one more motion before trial, requesting Finn not be allowed in the courtroom during testimony, claiming his presence would be prejudicial to jurors, that seeing the child would create emotional bias against Diane. Nicole opposed it, said Finn was the victim and had every right to be present. Judge ruled Finn could be in the courtroom but not during medical testimony describing his injuries. Compromise nobody was happy with. Trial started on a cold Monday in January. Courthouse was old granite with too much echo and not enough heat. Diane sat at the defense table wearing a cream-colored suit and pearls, hair perfectly styled. She looked like everyone's grandmother. Kind, trustworthy. That was the image Whitmore wanted. The defense table had photos of Diane with her grandchildren, with her church group, volunteering at a food bank, building the narrative of devoted family woman. Nicole's opening statement was brutal. She described walking through the door to find a grandmother forcing alcohol into a toddler's mouth, described 6 weeks of systematic poisoning, described Finn's hospitalization and liver damage and developmental delays, described a Facebook group coaching thousands of people through identical abuse, described Diane's complete lack of remorse even after arrest. The jury looked horrified. Then Whitmore stood for his opening statement. He talked about tradition, about how every culture had practices that seemed strange to outsiders but made sense within their context, about how Diane came from a family that valued resilience and strength, about how modern medicine had pathologized practices that had been used successfully for generations, about how this was a case of government overreach into family decisions, about how Diane loved her grandson and genuinely believed she was helping him, about reasonable doubt and alternative explanations. By the end of his statement, I could see at least 3 jurors nodding. He'd planted seeds, made it sound reasonable, made Diane sound like a victim of cultural misunderstanding. Nicole called Dr. Fleming first. He testified about Finn's condition when admitted. Blood alcohol level of 0.08, elevated liver enzymes, signs of chronic alcohol exposure, explained how alcohol affected developing bodies, how Finn's symptoms matched exactly what you'd expect from weeks of regular alcohol consumption. Whitmore's cross-examination focused on whether Dr. Fleming could prove the alcohol came from Diane, whether other sources were possible, whether medical conditions could mimic alcohol poisoning. Dr. Fleming shut him down methodically. The smell, the sippy cup, Diane's admission, my testimony, Officer Lawson's report. No other explanation fit the evidence. Nicole called me next. I testified about walking in and seeing Diane with the sippy cup, the smell of whiskey, Finn's reaction, Diane's explanation, the Facebook group, 6 weeks of posts documenting the poisoning. Whitmore's cross-examination was aggressive. He asked about my relationship with Diane before the incident. Had we gotten along? Yes, fine. Any disputes? No. Any reason I'd want to frame her? No. He suggested maybe I'd been drinking. Maybe I'd given Finn the alcohol, and when Diane caught me, I'd blamed her. I said that was insane. He said insane like calling the police on your mother-in-law for traditional parenting? The judge sustained Nicole's objection, but the seed was planted. Then Whitmore asked about my work schedule, my stress levels, whether I'd ever lost my temper with Finn. I said no. He asked if I was sure. Played video from their investigation showing me yelling at Finn in a parking lot 2 months before the incident. I'd been frustrated because Finn was having a meltdown. I'd raised my voice. Nothing abusive, but not patient either. Whitmore suggested maybe I had anger issues. Maybe I'd been the one hurting Finn all along. Nicole's redirect had me explain the video. Normal parental frustration? Nothing remotely related to systematic poisoning, but I could see it had affected some jurors. Autumn testified next. Described her mother's call 6 weeks before, the vague mention of traditional strengthening methods, her approval without details, her guilt over not asking questions, her horror discovering what had actually happened. Whitmore's cross-examination was vicious. He asked about Autumn's childhood, the ice baths, the forced exercises, the bitter herbs, made her confirm these practices had been part of her upbringing, asked if they'd damaged her. Autumn said yes. He asked her to specify the damage. Where was she injured? Did she have medical records showing harm? She said the damage was psychological. He asked if she'd ever been diagnosed with anything. No formal diagnosis? He suggested maybe there was no damage. Maybe she'd misinterpreted strict parenting as abuse because modern culture had made her oversensitive. Maybe she was doing the same thing now with her mother's treatment of Finn. Autumn started crying on the stand. Nicole's redirect had her explain that abuse doesn't always leave physical scars, that psychological harm was real even without diagnoses. But again, I saw jurors looking uncertain. Whitmore's defense started with his expert witnesses, The cultural anthropologist testified that alcohol exposure in children was practiced in multiple historical cultures. Medieval Europe gave children wine. Asian cultures used rice wine in coming-of-age rituals. These practices didn't produce generations of damaged children. Therefore, small amounts of alcohol weren't inherently harmful. Nicole's cross-examination got him to admit these historical practices involved single ceremonies, not 6 weeks of daily dosing. That traditional coming-of-age rituals happened with adolescents, not toddlers. That none of these practices involved blood alcohol levels of 0.08 in 3-year-olds. But the damage was done. He'd made it sound like Diane's actions had historical precedent. The naturopathic doctor testified that controlled exposure to toxins could stimulate immune response. That homeopathy was based on similar principles. That alternative medicine recognized benefits to controlled discomfort. Nicole destroyed him on cross. Asked about his credentials, his medical license, his peer-reviewed publications. He had an online degree from an unaccredited institution. No medical license. No published research. Judge instructed jury to disregard his testimony as expert opinion, but let it stand as lay opinion. More confusion. More doubt. The parenting coach testified that traditional discipline methods were being unfairly criminalized, that parents had the right to raise children according to their values, that government interference in family decisions was dangerous overreach, talked about spanking being legal, about homeschooling freedoms, about parental rights, drew parallels between Diane's case and other instances of traditional parenting being prosecuted. Nicole got her to admit she had no medical training, that she'd never studied child development academically, that her coaching business had been sued multiple times by parents whose children were removed by CPS. But again, seeds planted. Then Diane testified. Whitmore walked her through her family history, her father's traditional methods, how she'd raised 3 successful children, how she'd noticed Finn's weakness and wanted to help, how she'd researched and found the Facebook group, how she'd followed their protocols carefully, measured doses, documented reactions, everything scientific and controlled. She cried on the stand, said she loved Finn more than anything, would never intentionally hurt him, was trying to give him the strength he'd need to succeed in life. Nicole's cross-examination was devastating. She asked Diane if she understood that Finn was hospitalized. Yes. That he had liver damage. Yes. That he had developmental delays. Yes. Did she feel responsible? Diane hesitated. Said she felt responsible for trying to help, but not for the negative outcomes. Those were the medical system overreacting. Nicole asked if Diane had medical training. No, but she'd done research. Nicole asked if Facebook posts counted as medical research. Diane said they were from experienced parents who'd successfully used these methods. Nicole asked how Diane knew they were successful, because they said so in the group. No follow-up, no verification, just trust. Nicole asked if Diane understood that giving alcohol to a 3-year-old was illegal. Diane said bad laws shouldn't be followed. Nicole asked if Diane would do it again if given the chance. Diane said yes, but with better monitoring to avoid the medical system's interference. The courtroom went completely silent. Even Whitmore looked shocked. Diane had just admitted she'd do it again. Showed zero remorse. Believed she'd been right. Nicole sat down. No more questions needed. Closing arguments happened the next day. Nicole laid out the evidence methodically. The eyewitness testimony, the medical records, the Facebook documentation, Diane's own admission, most importantly, her complete lack of remorse, her stated intention to repeat the abuse if given the chance. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, systematic, unrepentant child abuse. Whitmore's closing focused on reasonable doubt, on cultural differences, on parental rights, on the possibility that modern medicine was wrong about traditional practices, on the loving grandmother who'd been trying to help in the only way she knew how. He asked jurors to consider whether criminalizing traditional parenting was the society they wanted to live in. It was manipulative but effective. I saw jurors nodding. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, longest 11 hours of my life. We waited in a conference room. Autumn paced. I sat. Nicole came in periodically with updates. They'd asked for clarification on the charges, asked to review Diane's Facebook posts, asked about the definition of reckless endangerment. Finally, at 6 p.m., they came back. We filed into the courtroom. Diane sat straight at the defense table, looked confident. The foreman stood. Count 1, child endangerment. Guilty. Count 2, assault. Guilty. Count 3, reckless endangerment. Guilty. Diane's face didn't change, didn't show emotion, just sat there, processing. Whitmore looked stunned. Autumn grabbed my hand and squeezed so hard it hurt. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks out. Diane was remanded into custody, pending sentencing. As officers approached with handcuffs, Diane turned and looked directly at Autumn. Not angry, not sad, just disappointed, like Autumn had failed a test. That look would haunt my wife for years. Sentencing hearing was packed. Diane's family filled the left side of the courtroom. Autumn's siblings, her father, aunts and uncles and cousins, all there to support Diane. We sat alone on the right side, isolated. The judge called for victim impact statements. Nicole had prepared us. I went first. Read a statement about watching Finn struggle with nightmares and fear, about his developmental delays and liver damage, about the permanent trust that was broken. Autumn read about losing her mother and her family, about realizing her entire childhood had been abuse, about the guilt of not protecting her son. Dr. Fleming submitted a written statement about Finn's ongoing medical needs. Dr. Laurent submitted one about his psychological trauma. Then the judge asked if Diane wanted to speak. She stood, said she maintained her innocence, that she'd acted out of love, that history would prove her methods were valid, that she was sorry Finn had experienced discomfort, but not sorry for trying to make him stronger. The judge's face hardened. She said in 30 years on the bench, she'd never seen such complete lack of insight or remorse, that Diane represented an ongoing danger to children, that her stated intention to repeat the abuse removed any possibility of leniency. 8 years in prison, no parole eligibility for 4 years. Diane would be 71 at earliest release. Diane's family erupted, shouting about injustice and persecution. Bailiffs had to restore order. Autumn's father stood and screamed that we destroyed their family, that Diane was a good woman being punished for tradition. Security escorted him out. Autumn's sister spat at us as we left the courtroom. Literally spat. Called us traitors and child abusers. Said we were the ones who should be in prison. Outside the courthouse, Autumn broke down, sobbing about losing everyone. Her entire family had chosen Diane. Chosen to believe the abuse was justified. Chosen tradition over reality. We drove home in silence. Finn was with a sitter. When we picked him up, he asked if Grandma was done with time out. We said yes, but she had to stay in time out for a very long time. He accepted that with the simplicity of a child who didn't understand prison. 3 months after sentencing, Diane sent another letter from prison. 14 pages this time, explaining that prison had given her time to develop her theories further. She'd connected with other inmates who'd been persecuted for traditional parenting. They were building a support network, planning to appeal their convictions. She included research she'd compiled about historical alcohol use in children, asked us to reconsider keeping Finn from her influence, said when she got out, she hoped we'd allow supervised contact so she could continue his strengthening regimen. Autumn threw the letter away without finishing it, said her mother would die in prison believing she'd been right. That delusion was unshakable. 5 years later, Finn is 8. He's in therapy weekly. Still has nightmares sometimes. Still refuses to drink anything he can't see through. His liver recovered mostly. His developmental delays evened out with intervention. He's a normal kid now, mostly. Except he has no grandmother, no extended family on his mother's side. They all chose Diane. Autumn's siblings never reconciled. Her father died 2 years after the trial, still defending his wife. Autumn grieved him and her mother and her whole family, grieved the childhood she thought she'd had, built a new understanding of her past. She's in therapy too. We both are. Trauma echoes. Diane comes up for parole next year. We'll submit opposition statements, fight to keep her inside. She still writes letters every few months, still believes she was right, still plans to resume Finn's treatments when released. That conviction, that unshakable belief in her rightness, is the scariest part. Not the abuse itself, but the absolute certainty it was justified. That's what makes people like Diane so dangerous. They don't see themselves as abusers. They see themselves as educators, traditionalists, the ones who understand what modern society has forgotten, and they'll keep doing damage until someone stops them. We stopped Diane. But that Facebook group had 3,000 members. How many other children are being systematically poisoned by family members who call it tradition? How many other Finns are out there right now drinking whiskey from sippy cups while their parents work and trust that grandma knows best? That question keeps me up at night. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.